Oh, there you are. Today I'd like to make a video about madness, and more specifically about questioning our society's dominantly socially sanctioned view of madness. Part of the reason why I want to do this is I'm interested in making actually a longer series of videos, each one on a particular phenomenon that I think has almost a completely negative valence for most people. So here's a running list of topics that I'm thinking about for about my next 6 to 8 videos. Nihilism, chaos, madness, decadence, destruction, depression, dilettantism, and stupidity. But at this point, maybe some of you are thinking, well, why would you want to do that? Why would anyone want to do that, actually? Well, to give you an answer to that question, let me tell you a little bit about my childhood. When I was a kid, my father would bring home the big fat Sunday newspaper, and in the big fat Sunday newspaper there would be a TV guide, and in the TV guide there'd be a list of movies, and in the list of movies there would be a rating beside each movie. And I would go through that list specifically looking for movies that had either 1 or 1/2 star ratings. I was fascinated by that because I was fascinated with the idea that any movie would repel people that much in order to get 1/2 or 1 star. So I would look through this list of movies and I would look at the little rating blurbs next to them, and if I found a blurb that said something like, "This movie is complete and unremitting tripe," well, I would be sure to mark that down in my little book because I wanted to see that movie that was complete and unremitting tripe, that's for sure. Of course, now it's many years later and I've grown up to be an adult, but I'm still looking for the 1 and 1/2 star movies, but this time the 1 and 1/2 star movies of existence itself. And that's what this series of videos is going to be about. I'm calling it the Reconsidered series of videos. So here's the first one in that new series, Madness Reconsidered. So, like I said in the introduction, in this video, I'd like to focus on madness, or more accurately, on questioning our collective negative appraisal of madness. But I should probably first describe my basic approach to this topic. First, I would say that it's inevitable that my approach has been shaped by the fact that I've been a student of psychology and philosophy for around 30 years now, and a professor of psychology for almost 25 years. I should probably also tell you that my original training was in clinical psychology, but since then I've taken a much more academic route. So I have a reasonable understanding of madness as it's conceived in terms of clinical psychopathology. However, my approach to this topic has also been informed by my more informal personal practice of Buddhist meditation, which I've been doing for around the last 10 years or so. And that's where I'd like to start. One of the remarkable things about meditation, especially in the early stages of practice, is that it's a way of becoming mindfully aware of how our consciousness is moving from moment to moment. Of course, we don't normally even notice this sort of thing. Normally, we simply experience the final, outermost surface of it in the form of the emotions, thoughts, and memories, hopes, fears, distractions, desires, and values that fill our everyday awareness. And it takes a special act of reflective awareness, a special moment of interior stillness when we've allowed all of our usual preoccupations to drain away, to notice how we're really moving from moment to moment. And as we learn to become aware of how our consciousness is moving, one of the things that most of us discover in meditation, especially in the West, is how full of chaotic garbage our awareness really is. In Buddhist parlance, we call this monkey mind. In reality, our everyday awareness is usually moving pretty frenetically, like a crazed monkey leaping from branch to branch, ceaselessly questing after the next banana. The fact is that most of us spend the bulk of our lives caught in the seething turmoil of our attachments, desires, and aversions, and we're pretty thoroughly ruled by the thoughts and feelings that attend them. And it can be a startling realization, not merely to notice this, but to catch sight of how insane it really is. How chaotic and incoherent our thoughts really are before we've neatly rearranged them for ourselves and for the public. In other words, the disquieting realization that often comes with practicing meditation is that we're really raving lunatics on the inside, even if we're able to wear nice clothes, say sensible and predictable things, and pay our taxes on the outside. And what a tremendous shock it is for most of us to realize that we've really been crazy all along. But a similar kind of realization often occurs when people study psychology, and especially clinical psychology. For instance, it's a fairly common phenomenon for undergraduate students taking their first class in abnormal psychology to see themselves reflected in each DSM category they read about. One week all the students think they're depressed, then next week it's a delusional disorder, and the week after that they all have personality disorders. Then eventually they discover to their horror that the entire DSM is really about them and the different ways they're personally screwed up. And this horrific realization is only compounded in graduate school when they learn psychotherapeutic technique, which inevitably throws them back on themselves and their own personal suffering in life. And as their therapeutic acumen grows over time, they learn to hear the subtle intimations of suffering and madness in other people's voices too. Then eventually it dawns on them that pretty much everyone on the planet is caught in that same screaming wind. We've all been marked and wounded and scarred, in various ways and to varying degrees to be sure, but we've all been annihilated and we're all afraid. We all end up shedding blood along the road of life, and so there's nothing particularly shameful about it. In fact, it's one of the best and noblest things about us, that we can feel all of that and know all too well the terror and pain and chaos of human existence and still move forward against all odds. And as these students continue growing, both intellectually and personally, they discover that the divide that supposedly separates them from people who are broken and crazy is not so distinct as it seems at first. And so, the proper therapeutic response is not to rush to the comfort of our quasi-moralistic judgments of the people we've coded as crazy, but to develop genuine compassion for their suffering, because their suffering is always a reflection of our own. So the culmination of this learning process, both in psychology and in the practice of meditation, is the recognition that madness is not the boogeyman or boogie person we usually take it to be, but merely an expression of the conditions and dynamics that exist in pretty much every human being. However, the deeper and perhaps more unsettling reality of our inner madness is that it's also the bearer of tremendous gifts for us, if we have the courage to recognize and receive them. One place to glimpse this is in the domain of creativity. That's because genuine creativity demands that we extend ourselves beyond the confines of our world's prevailing conventions and orthodoxies, beyond what's already tried and tested, beyond what's safe and secure. The author Kurt Vonnegut illustrated this point pretty well when he said, "We have to continually be jumping off cliffs and developing our wings on the way down." In other words, creativity is about taking risks when, in our world, it will almost always seem to be more sane to stay safe and warm in our comfort zones. Similarly, in his Zarathustra, Nietzsche writes, "One must still have chaos within oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." And in The Gay Science, he further states, "Those thinkers for whom all stars move in cyclic orbits are not the most profound. Whoever looks into himself as into vast space and carries galaxies within himself also knows how irregular all galaxies are. They lead into the chaos and labyrinth of existence." In other words, living the creative life, including the life of one's own creative personal metamorphosis, means being able to honor the principle of chaotic disintegration as well as that of orderly coalescence. Or, as Frank Zappa once succinctly put it, "Without deviation from the norm, progress is not possible. However, beyond the sphere of creativity, the gift of our inner madness receives yet another kind of positive affirmation in the domain of meditative spiritual practice, at least the sort that I personally practice. In meditation, we learn not to run away from what seems antithetical to our ideal of meditative consciousness, but to become mindfully and acutely aware of it. So, when we glimpse the frenetic madness of our monkey mind, the point is not to try to force ourselves to stop it, which would amount to just another form of monkey mind. We learn that our crazy monkey mind, our habitual attachments and aversions and preoccupations, are really nothing more than just another state of consciousness, another type of human experience, another possible gateway and opportunity to practice meditative consciousness. So, we learn to make our seemingly anti-meditative monkey minds the focus of our meditative practice. In other words, instead of running from our inner chaos and insanity, we learn to let it be what it is, but to be mindfully aware of it at the same time. Basically, we learn to make friends with our madness, to stop resisting it, and to appreciate it as the road we must travel to develop our consciousness and our presence to the world. The Tibetan Buddhist Chogyam Trungpa, for instance, calls this the manure of experience, which naturally seems repugnant at first, but which ultimately serves to fertilize and nourish the fields of our meditative awareness. But beyond this, in the Buddhist traditions, we also have the idea of crazy wisdom. This means that sometimes what appears to be simple craziness is really an expression of someone's enlightenment. For instance, seeming craziness can sometimes be a way that a relatively enlightened person is trying to help us move past our usual constrictions and fixations, usually by disrupting the regularity of our habitual experience. For instance, Chogyam Trungpa himself embodied a lot of this crazy wisdom. At one level, he was undoubtedly an infamous iconoclast and libertine, especially relative to the standards that usually apply to Tibetan lamas. But on the other side of the coin, there's the stunning lucidity and directness of his writings. The point, of course, is that once again, the divide between sanity and madness is not nearly as obvious as it seems at first. And what seems like craziness is sometimes life's way of offering us the chance to transcend our own constrictions and limitations. Okay, at this point, let's take a minute to summarize. First, when you think about it, it turns out that madness is really nothing more than an expression of dynamics that run through pretty much everyone's consciousness, as can be obvious by practicing meditation or by studying psychology. Furthermore, the madness that we usually construe in fairly negative, disparaging terms can easily bear worthwhile gifts for us. These would include the gift of creative expression, which naturally involves honoring both the principle of chaotic disintegration as well as that of orderly coherence, and which is the wellspring of all real progress in our world. And finally, within a meditative framework, our inner chaos and madness turns out to be the very pathway of any substantive movement toward enlightenment, which itself sometimes appears in the form of craziness. As Nietzsche once famously put it, "And those who were dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music." So, in light of all of this, the question is, why are we so slow to recognize the ubiquity of madness as well as our own personal participation in it? And why are we so eager to reject its worthwhile gifts and to demonize and extirpate it where possible? I suspect that the deep answer to these questions ultimately has to do with our basic insecurity about life itself. In one of his YouTube videos, the Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson aptly describes this existential insecurity in terms of how much of the universe there is and how little of us there is. And it seems to me that against the backdrop of life's immensity and our own relative insignificance and fragility, we tend to cling pretty tenaciously to simplistic binary ways of understanding things, mostly as a way of trying to allay our existential anxieties. And our treatment of madness would seem to be a case in point. In other words, our typical conventional view of madness isn't really about direct and forthright appraisal of reality. It's really about us and our anxieties, and especially about our fear of confronting how wide and how wild the horizon of life actually is. However, at the same time, I feel that we can always do better than that, as we can in pretty much every other area of our lives. One of the outstanding characteristics of human existence, it seems, is our amazing capacity for sudden bursts of self-transcendence. And so it is, I suspect, with regard to our attitudes toward madness. But it's probably also worth noting that moving toward a more mature and balanced view of madness entails a special kind of paradoxical challenge. That's because a supposedly sane person would never seriously question the prevailing socially sanctioned definition of madness, much less seek to extend himself beyond the comfort zone of that definition. So, the act of allowing ourselves to perceive the positive aspects of madness alongside its more obvious negative aspects is already a suspect endeavor, at least according to our world's prevailing social conventions. In other words, it requires a measure of courage to see beyond the pale of our world's social programming where madness is concerned. And it probably also requires a certain measure of rebellious spirit, the kind that defiantly refuses to be confined to any particular orthodoxy, and that always secretly yearns for contact with the infinite beyond. And so, in the final analysis, perhaps the question underlying madness is, are our lives mostly about staying safe within the ambit of conventional thinking and conventional life? Or is life lived much better at the outer edges of how we've been told to think and told to be? Just a thought. Have a nice day.